we will come back to the table. Right, with item 14, we have our council group submission on, hang on, there's a lot of, hold on a second. Ding, ding, we're starting. Right, council group submission on proposed wastewater environmental performance standards to Water Services Authority Taumata Arawai. We have Dave and Andrew and also Helen Shaw from Watercare. Thank you for coming in. As I know, this is we've been working together on this submission. So I just might move what's there, if I have a seconder, Councillor Sayers, and then we'll head to, I think, Dave first. Sure.
Kia ora everyone, thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you the proposed submission for in response to Taumata Arawai in terms of these proposed wastewater environment performance standards. I'm Dave Allen from the Policy Department. With me is Andrew Miller, and Helen Shaw is the Head of Strategy and Consenting at Watercare. So I'll just briefly run through the intent of the regulations. So if we just find the slide thing. So firstly, just to recognise that we've had quite a change of a statutory environment over the last few years. We've had the Water Services Act created in 2021, largely in response to drinking water issues from 2016, but it obviously includes provisions for wastewater and stormwater activities as well. And one of the sections of this Act enables the making of wastewater standards, which we're now looking at. There's been a number of other changes recently in terms of the water services delivery models and how that impacts a number of the network operators across the country. And of course we've had some specific provisions that relate to Watercare as well in terms of the order that was just made in the last month. The other thing I've just got on this slide is the Local Government Water Services Bill. That's with the Select Committee at the moment, and there are some amendments to the wastewater standards provisions in there at the moment. And so in terms of the timing of the wastewater standards, they're not likely to be brought into effect until this particular amendment has gone through. The current timing is for about September this year for the wastewater standards to be brought into effect. So just in terms of why the standards have been created, one of the key issues is that about 57% of all consents across the country are due to expire in the next 10 years, and there's basically a number of these treatment plants around the country are about 30 or 40 years old. And so basically there's a need or an opportunity to look at how wastewater standard treatment processes and the consenting regime for them can be brought up to a particular standard. The key thing I've got here is that that particular environment in terms of where these wastewater treatment plants are at, and also the risks of wastewater getting into drinking water supplies, etc., has meant that there's been quite a focus on water reforms recently. And so the intent here is to largely look at deriving consistent water standards, which basically are trying to achieve better environmental outcomes, cost and time efficiencies in terms of consenting investment planning, and also for regulators and infrastructure owners giving a bit more certainty as to the processes that would apply when consents come up for renewal. There's a number of issues with a lack of consistent standards for reporting and monitoring across the country, so there's an interest from Taumata Arawai to standardise those. And the one thing I just wanted to highlight is that this particular wastewater standard batch does not encompass septic tanks, so that's something that's possibly for the future that's been flagged, but not in this initial batch of wastewater standards that have been identified. There are 4 proposed wastewater standards in this package. One of them, and the main one, relates... Oh, sorry. There we go. The first one is discharges to water, which is the main one, and we have main contaminants that have been identified by Taumata Rawai, and basically they are the things like E. coli, total suspended solids, biochemical oxygen demand, total phosphorus, total nitrogen. So they are the main contaminants that the standards relate to, not the full suite of contaminants that might otherwise be considered, but they are the main ones that drive a lot of the processing of wastewater. The standards try to describe 7 different receiving environments, from lakes through to rivers to enclosed coastal areas to open ocean, and then look at what standard of wastewater treatment should apply in each of those particular receiving environments. The other thing is that for small treatment plants that have a minimal impact, there's an exception policy that's been produced that tries to keep the burden of costs to a low level for those particular plants. The discharge to land, in simple terms, is for looking at how we can manage risk associated with discharges to land, and basically if you've got a framework in place that actually looks at the land that you're looking to discharge contaminants on and classifying its risk in terms of any other adjacent land or cultural values or other receiving environments, then you can actually look at actually moving to a more permitted access route for a consenting environment if it's a low impact, and if it's not, then there is the higher risk produces a higher consenting approach to that particular discharge application. Again, treatment requirements are limited, just in this case to 3 contaminants, total nitrogen, total phosphorus and E. coli. There's an expectation of management operation plans being produced, and that includes things like, well, how often would you desludge these areas? Might be, maintenance associated with flood events or climatic conditions. So there's an expectation that those plans will be produced as a requirement under these discharge standards, and that will be audited, monitored by Taumata Rawai. The next 2 are the beneficial reuse of biosolids and the wastewater network overflows and bypasses. For biosolids, or for both of these standards, they do look to the Auckland Unitary Plan provisions, and they've picked up on a lot of the parameters associated with the Auckland Unitary Plan. Basically, in the case of biosolids, again, it's about for high processed biosolids that have gone through a grading approach, that biosolid can be reused as a permitted activity. Whereas if it's a lower level of treatment, there'll be some sort of consenting requirement and some assurance in terms of how that biosolid is reused. Again, there's associated reporting requirements that are proportional to the risk associated with that particular discharge. For wastewater network overflows and bypasses, the key requirement they're sort of really identifying here is the need to produce a wastewater risk management plan. There would be an expectation of community input into that wastewater risk management plan. There are some monitoring and reporting requirements which are at this point in time unspecified in the proposal, but which would be looked to be worked through after the engagement exercise. And a lot of the overflows and bypasses would be classified as a controlled activity in terms of consenting, and for half of the country they classify overflows and bypass activities as a prohibited, or overflows as a prohibited activity. In the case of a number of other councils, including ours, we've got a consent approach that's more recognising that some of these things are inevitable. So just in terms of some of the observations from the staff, and we have collected views from regulatory compliance, planning, policy, water care, healthy waters and flood infrastructure, flood resilience. We've looked at a whole bunch of different angles on this particular proposal. One of the key concerns we've identified is that these standards will prevail over the RMA provisions. So if you were looking to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, limiting discharges and making allocations of discharges to a particular receiving environment, well, that wouldn't apply. Basically, these standards will enable for discharges under the Water Services Act. The standards only apply to some consented activities for that particular site, so you may have an air discharge from a wastewater treatment discharge operation that would still go through the normal resource consent process, whereas the key elements that we're talking about through the wastewater standards would still need to be processed under that particular framework. Some of the other issues we have is that there's not really an incentive necessarily here or an ability to allocate the discharge for the network operator relative to other discharges into a harbour or into a receiving environment. So you might expect that there'll be other people in the receiving environment that will have to do more to actually manage discharges than perhaps what might be permitted under a consent issued to a network operator. Councils aren't expected, or sorry, not allowed to offer consent conditions that are more stringent than what might be in these wastewater standards. That differs from what applies with the national environmental standards that would be under the RMA. It's a different approach. And again, it's all about providing for consistency of how the standards are applied in practice. And then I guess the other thing is that the monitoring and reporting framework for the wastewater standards will differ from what might be required from an RMA context in terms of things you might be interested in from an RMA perspective, such as the dispersal pattern of discharges once it reaches beyond the end of the pipe. So there's a few differences there that we would probably want to see a little bit more alignment to that end. And I guess the other thing is that the Water Care Charter recently has set up a number of obligations for water care, and that speaks to the operational efficiencies that they're looking to try and achieve. And so we would want to probably ask the question, well, will these standards, how will that affect the efficiencies that are expected to be achieved from water care or other network operators more generally? Because the consenting timeframes, one of the rationales for these proposals is that the consenting timeframes will be reduced. That may not be the case if there are other consents that relate to the wastewater treatment plant that are not covered by the wastewater standards. One of the observations that we make in Auckland is that the treatment that's conducted in Auckland by Water Care is likely to probably exceed the proposed standards for some receiving environments, and that would suggest to me that there's an issue there about what cost savings could be made, but also what environmental challenge you might then present if you didn't have the same level of treatment. So it's a bit of a trade-off between those two different dimensions. Again, there's a bit of concern about the reporting and monitoring requirements in terms of what might be required and what is appropriate, what's fit for purpose. We do expect some operational savings, but there are some implications for environmental outcomes. There's also a question about what appetite there will be to review standards in the future. We have things like climate change, new technology. We would want to be in an innovative environment where you could say that if a new bit of technology comes on stream later on, that you'd want an incentive for a network operator to utilise that new bit of technology. Climate change might throw up a number of other things, so you might want to look at how that's addressed through these standards. And I guess the other thing is that we just more broadly had a discussion around when these regulations come into effect and whether or not there's more time required for some of the people who know about this stuff a bit more to talk with Te Amata Arawai to actually make sure that some of our concerns are best addressed, and that might be from simply a network operator point of view as well as a regulator point of view. So I think we'll be saying in the submission that, and in fact we have said in the draft submission, that we think that that sort of engagement needs to occur with Te Amata Arawai between now and when these regulations are brought into place. So I've sort of outlined some of these things. There's a number of areas that are not adequately considered. There's no real recognition of what's expected of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. Admittedly, that's going to be reviewed. Cumulative impacts not considered. Bioaccumulation is not considered. seasonal differences are mentioned, but not perhaps sufficiently. There's some clarity required on what the receiving environments are. What's the difference between an estuary and a harbour? What's the difference between the dilution rates that might apply in those environments? There's no upper limits to the parameters in terms of what can be discharged. So you might have a pollution spike, but all the Taumata Arawai standards are speaking to is an annual median outcome. And so you may not actually have the environmental outcome that you're trying to seek. There's some treatment plants that will have some exceptions, so we're just working through how that applies. And I guess there's some concerns about any discharges in the proximity of certain sites of particular interest, and so we've identified Maori reservations as one example of that through the paper. So discharged land we generally support. We think there's some opportunity to look at buffers and how they're applied. So soil moisture conditions are applicable, seasonal factors in terms of rainfall and permeability in the land. We don't want to see that these standards apply to the on-site wastewater treatment systems. They need to be handled probably separately anyway, and there's a second batch that's likely to be considered for that. And the monitoring and reporting needs a bit of work. Excuse me. In terms of biosolids, we're generally supportive of the approach, risk-based approach. We're obviously also interested in the opportunity to see biosolids used in other ways, and so into the future, subject to certain qualifying criteria, so we want to make a bit of a plug for that. And as for overflows and bypasses, we just want to make sure that we are not seeing just primary discharges necessarily to open oceans or to a receiving environment. We do want to see some level of screening in the case of some of those bypasses. And yes, we do support community input on wastewater risk management plans that the network operator would be producing. And I think just the other observation here is that there's some other things that are affected by discharges which may not be adequately recognised at the moment. So that could be things like public health as it relates to shellfish harvest or aquaculture. And we do note the use of telemetry in terms of monitoring and reporting as a new technology which is supported at appropriate level of sites. And that is probably enough for overview. I just wanted to note that we've only got until the 24th of April to submit on this report. The recommendations speak to the Chair, Deputy Chair and the Haukora representative to sign this off. If you're generally comfortable with the direction of the submission to date, that would be great. We'll need the next week to work up some of the details. We've still got a number of staff and a number of departments in water care working through some of the details of this because it's quite complicated. And so, you know, I just would hope that we have that opportunity to socialise those further insights with the three delegated authorisers. Thank you.
Thank you. Huge amount of work there, and we trust that you are the experts, and thank you for working together on this. The Mayor did have one question, and I approached you both on whether we need to or could ask for the government to either have water care in the fold or have experts working with them, or what a resolution might look like to make sure our size and scale and expertise are taken into consideration through this process. Is that accurate, Mayor, of what you asked? Yeah.
So yes, I think we can, some text could be introduced in the resolutions to talk to that staff actively engage with Taumata Arawai, but, you know, following the submission being, you know, put in with a view to offering our expertise, you know, to build on, or to ensure that the standards are fit for purpose, basically.
Cool. Megan, if we could just get some, while the questions are happening, some words that and that say Watercare and Dave's team will work with or alongside, or yeah, just to ensure that our expertise are put in there. I'll go to you first, Mayor, and then Deputy Mayor.
Okay. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. This is a highly risky time for us here in this one. I've had altogether too many years' experience in this, and Ministry of Environment have got a habit of coming up with Rolls-Royce conditions for a Morris Minor economy, and there are huge undeliverable economic accidents that come out of this. So first, I've got 3 or 4, but first of all, are water care involved in our preparation of our submission?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, that's good. Have we estimated what costs might come out of this to us and water care?
So the nature of the standards as they've been proposed are throwing up quite a few different questions for us as to how we would, let's say, what receiving environment are we looking at when we say the discharges that currently flow into particular areas, and we have to make a decision about if it's an open ocean or a low coastal environment, and there are different standards proposed for each of those, which will have a bearing on cost. And so the definitions of those receiving environments are unclear, and until we get some clarity on that, it's difficult to assess. Watercare have provided some indicative figures on possible savings. We've got that in the draft currently, and they could be tens of millions of dollars for sure, even more. And so we need to look at, well, what is the trade-off between what you want to achieve in terms of processing outcome as well as the environmental outcomes as well.
It's sort of a classic case of what I say, first of all, is what is the problem you're fixing? I'm not quite sure if it's very clear to us what the problem is that they're fixing, but is a real definition of a problem, or is the problem just self-employment for people down there? But I've got the questions. What about private systems that water care have approved, like beachlands and whatnot? Who's responsible then, them or us?
So the scope of this is for public networks and not private.
But there's some very large private networks that serve public areas. So what's the definition of that? Is it the ownership or the size?
I'm happy to make that point and investigate that further just to make sure we've got that clarified.
People in Wellington don't seem to understand there are large private water suppliers and large private sewerage suppliers in New Zealand. What about networks that have consents that are up for renewal? Will this mean a complete retrofit? Because in some cases the retrofits are so expensive that they'll just abandon the system and you'll go back to no results. So
yes, so the intent here is that while these regulations will be passed by, say, September, that it's only once a consent comes up for renewal that these would apply. And so, yes, there could be some implications for some of those treatment plants in terms of what standards they need to meet. I guess the key point, just going back to the problem definition, is for a number of these treatment plants around the country, they will probably need to invest more to bring up their infrastructure to a certain standard. For Auckland, it may be a different situation for some of our treatment plants.
Well, we've got the experience of sudden, belated gross overreaction that happened when the Napier bore simply wasn't put in properly. And the next thing, billions of dollars across the country are spent on something that was never going to happen and shouldn't have happened in the first place. So we need to have in our submission that the government is taking a huge risk in doing this, and because the costs of getting this wrong are immense, both financially and environmentally, but particularly financially, because we should be doing things which improve the situation. In some cases, the situation is bad, and improvement is well worth doing, but it may well not improve to a certain Rolls-Royce standard. So I remain deeply cynical about this, And even though I'm not looking for extra work, I wonder whether or not perhaps as the only person with a lot of experience in this, I shouldn't be added to a C, but I'm not looking for extra problems. But if I don't get my aura in now, it'll be a worse problem in a year's time.
Can I make the comment, Mayor, that the intent is to make things easier in terms of consenting and investment planning?
I've heard plenty of times when they've been making it easier and cheaper,
yes,
that have ended up being exact opposite.
Yeah.
The hail hazardous activities industry list springs to mind as a disastrous bloody venture of the government into the environment.
I've added you to C, Mayor. Right. Was there any other questions or clarification there?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having a look at what's put in there. I'm not really looking for extra stuff, but I just feel that unfortunately I have a lot of experience in this, and it hasn't been fun.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I kind of wish I had a recorder on you. I suppose I could always go back and listen, because what you said was much easier to understand than what you wrote. I'm just telling you for your paper. It was kind of, I was all over the show, but the way you explained it was much easier. Thank you. I suppose what I was going to ask you, and the Mayor's asked some of my questions, will this increase council's costs for our infrastructure investment?
So again, it will depend on what the standards mean to various treatment plants and their receiving environments. The intent is that this could, for some of those treatment plants, would generate savings because there'll be a lower level of standard to comply with.
Okay. Yeah, and on the overflows and bypass management stuff, do you think, I mean, how will the standards actually change on that? Do you think it'll make overflows and bypasses more likely to happen or less likely to happen?
Probably neither. I think it's similar to what we have already in place under the Auckland Unitary Plan. So it's pretty like that's how they base their proposals. So I think it's probably that one's probably not so much of an issue.
Okay, I'll leave it there. I won't speak. I will support it, but boy, the paper was challenging, I thought. But thank you for your explanation. I thought that was really good.
Yeah. Part of it is it's so heavily technical and complex because actually we're not the users of this. It's the technical people within mostly Watercare that do this work. So it needs to be technical. Thankfully, I'm not building pump stations and things myself. But are there any other questions? Cool. I think we'll get you to step back. We've added those points in. Thank you very much. Are there anyone who'd like to speak to this? Councillor Turner.
Just want to back up what the Mayor said on my perceptions, understandings and things I've heard on the Watercare Board as the lead councillor. They are as concerned about these sorts of things as you guys are. It's a huge subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? No? Thanks. All those in favour? Any opposed? Perfect. Thank you very much. Right, on to item 15, Auckland Council's submission on the term of Parliament. And I would like to just acknowledge, even though Warwick is not retiring or anything, but